On pages 254 to 272, we'll be talking about guidance. In Chapter 9, we talked about the 6-step approach to helping children learn to resolve conflicts. So in this chapter, we are focusing more on guiding specific behaviors. So there are 7 things that we're going to discuss that as early childhood caregivers we can do to help maintain an environment that is responsive and caring. We're going to talk about setting effective rules, how to address challenging behaviors in a positive way, employing positive guidance techniques, understanding time out, and what are some effective alternatives to time out. We're going to talk about addressing ongoing challenging behavior, stopping bullying, and then partnering with your families to make these things work, not only in the classroom but in the home. On page 259, down at the very bottom, there's a chart, figure 47, that talks about positive guidance versus punishment. So first, that skips a couple of pages, and we're going to go back to those others, but I feel like in order for us to really start our discussion, we have to understand what guidance is as opposed to what punishment is. On 258, there's some definitions for you about positive guidance, discipline, and punishment. All of those things do relate to preventing or handling challenging behaviors of children. But when we think about discipline is actually teaching or training. And what that does is give us an opportunity to teach the children what we want them to do, as opposed to punishment, which is a penalty for making a bad choice or breaking a rule. Now, what happens in the long term is that punishment will not very often correct a child's behavior, because punishment usually is a shameful or a hurtful, and sometimes not even related to the behavior. It's a reaction of the adult because they're angry in many cases. That doesn't create the change that we want in their behavior. When we discipline the children, when we're guiding and training them, we're teaching them what is the appropriate behavior. And so we're giving them room to make the choices on their own, but we're teaching them what we want from them or what we expect from them. Where punishment makes children dependent on an external reward to behave, rather than being internally motivated to make the best choices. Of course, children tend to be really bombarded with a lot of negative, what they cannot do. But what that does, when we as the adult in the situation give them so many negatives, is that we weaken the bond between us and the child. Children can't feel secure with themselves if they are constantly being reprimanded or scrutinized for the things that they do wrong, when we constantly notice every infraction that they make. What we do know is that learning appropriate behaviors for children is a process. They don't just come understanding what we expect of them and what is the right thing to do. Obviously, that goes back to discipline. We need to train them, and that takes time. But we do know that positive guidance is the best approach for us to support children in helping them learn to control their own behavior and their emotions. It gives the children a desire to behave. And so on page 259 at the top, it talks about if we are doing these things, then this motivates the children to demonstrate those positive behaviors. Some of those things are building trust, helping build their social emotional skills, teaching that problem solving and that conflict resolution, and allowing them to be as independent as possible. Now, in the chart, figure 47, where we're comparing positive guidance to punishment, what one encourages a child to feel and what the other does, what we've learned is positive guidance builds self-esteem, where punishment actually makes children feel worthless or angry. They're mad at us because we're punishing them. Positive guidance allows children to feel confident, where punishment, especially punishment that is invoked in front of other people, embarrasses children. And embarrassment has never taught a child to make good choices. It might stop behavior for a moment, but it will not change the behaviors. When there's positive guidance, children feel respected, but when there's punishment, children feel shamed. Positive guidance focuses on what a child can do. We're telling them what we want. We're telling them what they can do, what is the right choice. But punishment focuses on what they cannot do. And so when there's punishment, you're going to hear a lot of that negative talk. Positive guidance also examines why children are exhibiting the behaviors, where punishment only focuses on eliminating those behaviors. Positive guidance gives children some empowerment, where punishment actually intimidates children. And I know that this is an area of discussion where a lot of people feel conflicted about whether or not we should go with this all positive guidance or should we be punishing children. But if we want children to learn to control their behavior and to be internally motivated to make good choices, even when no one's watching, then we need to follow the route of positive guidance. And the example I use, and I think we talked about this quite some time ago, is if you're speeding in a car. If you're speeding, why shouldn't you do that? And lots of people will say, well, I shouldn't do it because I don't want to get caught by the police. I don't want to get a speeding ticket. When in reality, the real reason why we shouldn't speed is not because we don't want to get caught, not because we don't want to get a speeding ticket, but because it's dangerous and we don't want to hurt someone else or ourselves. That's the internally motivated reason behind not speeding, because we know that it is not safe, it is dangerous, and it is against the law. And yet you could poll many people, and probably the majority would say you don't speed because you don't want to get caught. And that's what children are doing. They're not making decisions because they know that it is the right thing to do. They're often making those decisions because they don't want the punishment that's going to be invoked. But what happens is then they will hide and they will become kind of sneaky at what they're going to do because they don't want to get caught. On pages 254 to 257, we'll talk about setting effective rules. We do know it's really important that there are very positive and clear, yet developmentally appropriate rules for the children in your classroom. So there are lots of guidelines on these pages to follow. I'm not going to talk about every one. I'm going to pull some out that are ones that I feel like we need to discuss, and then you can make sure to read over these pages and really absorb what it's talking about. Some things that I think are really important when we're setting rules for the children, we need to make sure that we model those rules. And so we need to be showing the children the appropriate behavior. That helps to build trust with the children, but also children don't necessarily do what we say, they do what we do. and that is absolutely the truth. I've been in lots of classrooms where one of the rules is to keep your feet on the floor. We know that we don't want children to climb on the furniture because they'll get hurt. And yet I'll see teachers sitting on the tables, and a child will inevitably come right over and try to sit up on the table with the adult, and the adult will tell the child that they need to sit in the chair. But yet they're sitting on the table. And so if we're modeling that behavior, of course the children are going to want to do what we're doing. It's real important that our space is set up so that there is room for the children to be alone if they choose to be, but also rooms for them or area for them to play in small groups, and to be able to maneuver the way that they need to get where they want to go and have space to do what they need to do. We do want to make sure that we acknowledge children's positive choices and give them many opportunities to be successful. Children who feel successful, and we talked about this in self, will exhibit more positive behaviors for us. We need to understand what is developmentally appropriate in children's behaviors. They're not all yet ready to share, and so one of the things that we can do is make sure that there are duplicates of items that are really popular. Learning to share and take turns is a process, and so some of them may not be there yet. And if there are things that everybody wants, then we need to have more than one of them. We want to make sure that we do give them lots of opportunity to say no when it's acceptable, even if it's silly games that they can say no, or songs where they can shout out no. That gives them the opportunity to feel like they can use that word in a manner that is acceptable, and that it gives them an opportunity to kind of play with the idea of being in control. We want to be really attentive to behavior patterns. When we have a child or children who are exhibiting challenging behaviors, we want to observe them, and we want to document when is this occurring and what's happening before it occurs and what happens after it occurs, because we want to look for a pattern so that we can start helping that child to overcome those challenging behaviors. We want to make sure that we can set some clear positive rules, and we want to start only with a few rules. I tell people 1 rule per year of age is good. So if you've got 4-year-olds, 4 rules is perfect. But we want to make sure when we determine those rules that the children have some ability to help decide what the rules are going to be. We want to make sure that when we write those rules on the chart, that we write them in the positive. So rather than it saying don't run, it would say we use walking feet. And then it's really good for us to have pictures with the rule, because our children aren't readers yet. And so those pictures, of course, are the visual cue for them as to what the rule says. Now, I do encourage you to have rules for the inside and rules for the playground. And of course, those rules are going to be pertinent to whatever you need in your classroom and on your playground. If you have trouble with children trying to climb, then maybe your rule is going to be, or one of your rules will be, we keep our feet on the floor. Maybe it is we walk inside. Maybe it is we use inside voices. Maybe it is we use gentle hands. So you have to determine with the children what are the most important things for your classroom and your playground. Those rules should be displayed where the children can see them. I encourage you to have the playground rules near the exit door to the playground, so that you can review them as you're getting ready to go. When you're creating these rules, it's important for you to explain why. Why do we walk inside? Why should we use an inside voice? So that they can understand the concept behind what is the purpose of that rule. And then try to always acknowledge, or at least frequently acknowledge, when the children are following the rules, rather than noticing every time they don't follow the rules. We should try to notice when they do follow the rules, because when they get attention for a behavior, whether it's a good behavior or a negative behavior, if it gets them attention, they're going to keep doing that so that they can continue to get attention. When we talked a little bit earlier about figure 47 on page 259 is when we covered the majority of how to address challenging behaviors. But just to give you a few more things to think about in this part of the discussion, it's really important that we see our role as a guide and a support to the children in their developing the skills to manage their own feelings and emotions. We talked about viewing ourselves as a guide and a co-worker, and that the child is a partner to us in their education, and it's the same in their ability to learn those important social skills and emotional skills. And so part of this is all about our viewpoint. I think when we think about guiding young children, or we think about the topic of discipline, we think about the fact that we feel like we should be in control. And yet what's really important is that we're teaching the children to have control of themselves, not us controlling them. Because the moment that a child learns that we control their every move, their every decision, then what happens as they grow and they're never given freedom to make decisions? They're not going to know how. They're always going to be relying on us to tell them what's the right thing to do. And there comes a point when they have to be able to do that on their own. And so they need to start practicing that from these very young ages. They have minor decisions now, little things to determine what's the right thing to do. And as they grow, those things will grow also. And so it's a learning process. So what are some positive guidance techniques we can employ? The discussions from page 260 through 264. We've already talked about some of the things in reconfiguring the setting. Things like providing duplicates of popular toys, or setting a child up for success in simple ways, like if they are spilling things when they pour, sit them at the end so that by the time it gets to them it's not as heavy, and so maybe they're more likely to be able to pour without spilling. Making sure there's a space for them to be alone, making sure there's space for them to play with another small group of children. So those are some of the things with reconfiguring the setting. Determining the root cause and motivation for their challenging behavior. I talked a little bit ago about making sure that if they're demonstrating a challenging behavior, that you're looking for the root cause, that you observe them, that you document what happened before the behavior, what happened during the behavior. Often children don't know why they're acting a certain way, especially if they're very young children. They can't tell you why they're biting. But even preschoolers sometimes do not know why they're making the decisions they're making, why they're doing the things they're doing. And so it may require us to be able to observe the children and help to determine what the root cause is so that we can come up with a solution. Providing children with developmentally appropriate choices. You want to give children that empowerment to feel like they're in control and they can make a decision. And so you give them a choice of 2 or 3 things that are appropriate, and let them make the choice. It's kind of like the parent who will fight with their child every morning over what to wear. Sometimes that's just not worth the battle. And if they want to wear something particular, and there's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't, then sometimes we just have to give in to that. You have to pick and choose what your battle's going to be, and they need to have the ability to make some decisions for themselves. This is when this begins for them to be able to learn how to um, make a correct choice, and then what if they make a choice that's not the best choice? What are the consequences sometimes of that? We also want to think about, if they make an inappropriate choice, using that natural consequence as a way to educate them. A natural consequence is the inevitable result of their behavior. It's not something we imposed on them. It's something that happened because of whatever it was that they did. And so sometimes we have to help them understand those natural consequences. We want to coach children and support them in resolving conflicts independently. And I like the way we just talked last session about being a coach or a cheerleader. And obviously being a coach is the more supportive, helping to teach them role. And so we want to help them be able to resolve those conflicts on their own. We really want to be able to focus on the positive. When children live in a negative world, they exhibit negative behaviors. When they get attention for exhibiting negative behaviors, they're going to keep doing that because they're getting attention. We want to focus on the good things. We want to tell them what we want and what we don't want, and we want to tell them when they do things that are good. And we want to be specific. We want to say, I really like the way you helped your friend clean up. And then acknowledge children individually in front of a group. Not compare them. You don't want to say, Johnny, I really like how Susie is sitting. You need to sit like Susie. No, we want to say, I really like how you're sitting, Susie. And that's that. We're acknowledging the good choices. Not only is that building that child's self-esteem, but then the children who are not sitting are going to think, oh, she just said that she really liked how Susie was sitting. Maybe I should sit here, and she will acknowledge how I'm sitting. We want to help children do the right thing. They don't always know what the right thing is, and so we may have to help them do the right thing. And sometimes it has to happen with us talking them through that, giving them suggestions and ideas, modeling for them. Observe the children so that we know what and where they are in this process. Because the more that we know about the child, the more that we can help guide them in the directions that they need to go. We might learn what is it that's triggering those behaviors in them if we are observing them. And then we really have to individualize our approach to meet every child's need. What works with one child may not work with another child. And I often tell all of my students, and many of you who have already been observed, I've told you, with guidance, there is always room for us to continue learning new techniques, new methods, new ideas, because the things that work with this child may not work with this child. The things that work with this child today may not work with that child tomorrow. And so we have to be on top of this and continue learning new strategies that will be effective in helping the children gain control over their behaviors. Okay, understanding timeout and what are some effective alternatives. For quite some time, timeout was the thing. Everybody thought that that was the answer to every discipline problem that you would encounter, and we have quickly learned that this is not a real effective means of guiding the children. It is a form of punishment, which means then it shames and it embarrasses and all of those things. But it's not a teaching time. If we just remove a child from the group and we sit them somewhere alone and we're not talking to them and helping them understand what happened, then it truly is just a time away from the group. It's not a learning time. It's not an opportunity where we are helping the child to learn how to control their own behavior. Now, some people do use something called, it's called various things, but I hear it most often called the cool down, where they sit with the child where the incident happened and they talk with them through what could have been better choices, what might they have done, and if there's one or more children involved, then the whole group sits down and has this conversation. But they're not isolated from the group where in timeout they are. Um, it, if it's used infrequently, and you are there working with them and talking with them through the problem, then it's a time for you to teach them. But if it's overused and if the children are just sitting alone, more than likely that's never going to be effective. Children are sitting there and they're not thinking about what they did wrong. They're thinking about what they're going to do when they get up. They're thinking about how mad they are at the teacher who put them there or the child that they were fighting with, and that's why they got there. It's just not an effective approach. I see teachers leave children sitting there for a long time, and forever the rule was 1 minute per year of age, but it's often that children are forgotten about once they're put there. And so we really have to think this through. Now, there are some alternatives to this. You can always, use a little bit of time away. And the book, again, calls that cool down on page 267. And, just like I explained, you're going to sit with the children and talk to them. You could bring children in close. And that's you staying with them, giving them some affection, or helping them to calm down when they feel out of control. And then teaching just democratic life skills, helping them to begin to see themselves and others as worthy individuals and important members of a group, or helping them to express their emotions in a way that's not hurtful, an appropriate method, helping them to understand other people's feelings and viewpoints, and then helping them to learn how to work cooperatively in a large group. There's also a children's choice where if they are having a real disruptive behavior exhibited, then they can choose from some other activity to engage in. And you don't want them to see that other activity as a form of punishment, but you're giving them the choice. They may do this or they may go do this. And so it's not necessarily a timeout by any means, but it's just a redirection. So even when you've tried everything with a child, you've done all the things to employ positive guidance techniques with this child, you've refrained from timeouts and negative punishments, and you've really worked hard to use positive reinforcement and redirection, and helped the child to try to see and control their own behavior, and they still are having challenging behaviors. We see that all the time. A child in a classroom who, no matter how much it seems that the adult is trying to help them to control their choices and their behaviors, it just isn't happening. What we do know, though, is if their challenging behaviors are not addressed, and if we are not being successful in helping them to employ positive choices, often it leads to lifelong problems. They may not be as successful in school. They may not be as successful in social emotional arenas of their life. They may tend to lean toward having various mental illnesses. When we look at children who had challenging behaviors in preschool, there's lots of research out there that It's a predictor of delinquency, drug abuse, and antisocial behaviors as an adult. And so it's really important that we are treating our children with respect, and our focus is on their positive choices so that we continue encouraging these children to make the right decisions, and to do so because they're internally motivated to make the right decisions. We need to remain calm when we're dealing with behaviors. We need to remain as positive as possible. We need to make sure that even though the children may know that we didn't like their choice or we didn't like their behavior, that we still love them. We have to separate the two. Children are not bad or good as a choice. They are all innately good. Their behavior is what is bad, and we need to make sure that they understand that. We love them, but we did not like their choice. And so we need to look at making sure that we are really trying to instill that positive relationship and give them attention for the good choices. Just a few things about bullying. Of course, when we think about direct bullying, those are things like hitting or verbal type bullying. It might be kicking, name calling, teasing. Indirect bullying, of course, is a little less obvious. It may be threatening or teasing a child. We know children as young as 2, maybe even 1.5 years old, have been known to bully other children. Boys tend to be more physically aggressive, where girls tend to be more indirect. Girls tend to do things like rumor or telling secrets or excluding other children, where boys are just very aggressive in their bullying. So it's two totally different types often you'll see. What we do know is that a lot of time bullying occurs where the adults can't see it, and so we don't know that we need to be doing something about it every time that it occurs. Often, that more direct bullying, we see that because we see a child get hit, or we know that they got hit. We know that somebody bit somebody, but we often especially don't see those indirect bullying types. We know bullies tend to have a high self-esteem, where the children who are the recipients of that tend to have a low self-esteem and sometimes social isolation. But again, if we can employ positive guidance, that is the best approach for helping to stop this. We must teach children appropriate social skills. We have to teach them empathy and problem solving and self-regulation. We want to teach the child who is being bullied, of course, to be assertive. We want them to be able to feel like they can stand up for themselves. We want children to learn to speak positively, and that often comes by modeling. The more positive they are spoken to, the more they will speak positively to other people. And then we want to use books and puppets and story pieces, all those things to help children learn to work through their feelings. The more a child is able to understand their own feelings and deal with those, the less likely they are to exhibit negative behaviors onto another child. And then ending it all, pages 271 and 272 talk about partnering with your families. What can you do to get that positive guidance conversation going with your families? We want parents not only to know what are the positive things we are doing with their child in the classroom, but what are some positive guidance techniques that they can employ in their home as well.